Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Sass, Allison, Vala, Dino, David, Aaron, Sarah, Mickey, Stefan, Jade, Paul, Lauren B., Mark, and Abby and Jill. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. And because you joined in the month of December, you and everyone else who supports us on Patreon or with a one-time tip on buymeacoffee.com will be entered into our special holiday giveaway at the end of the month, which has multiple prizes, including some books you'll recognize, some exclusive swag, and a few tidbits I just picked up in the country of Japan, which I hope you'll enjoy. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and being entered into that giveaway, you'll find links to Patreon and buymeacoffee.com in the show description. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, in this season of lengthening nights and dropping temperatures here in the Northern Hemisphere, let's take a relaxing voyage to sunnier climes with a brand new book, Wintering in the Riviera, with notes of travel in Italy and France and practical hints to travelers, by William Miller, SSC, Edinburgh, with illustrations. First published in 1879 by Longmans Green & Co., London, and printed by Morrison and Gibb, Edinburgh, printers to Her Majesty's Stationery Office. Let's begin. This volume, containing memories of his beloved daughter's last journeyings, is inscribed to Christopher Godwin, Esquire, J.P., Stoke Bishop, Bristol. Preface. The health of my wife having rendered it advisable to spend a winter in the south of France, I made arrangements to accompany her, and we left home in October 1876. After a short stay at Cannes and 3 months in Mentone, with marked improvement, we made a tour of 4 months in Italy, and then passing the remainder of the summer of 1877 in Switzerland, and the autumn chiefly in Biarritz and Pau, we spent a second winter in the Riviera, principally in Mentone, returning to England via Turin in May 1878. We had visited so many places and seen so much while thus traveling during our first year that it occurred to me during our second sojourn at Mentone to write out some notes of what had come within our knowledge, which might prove both useful and interesting to others, and particularly to those who desired to winter in the Riviera. The field, however, was large, and to bring observation into reasonable compass, I could only present general views, indications merely, of what we had seen, and indeed more than this I could scarcely have ventured upon, because I had not traveled with any idea of writing on the subject, and the notes I had kept were therefore scanty, although sufficient, with a vivid recollection of so much calculated to impress, to enable me to describe, as far as description is perhaps desirable. We saw much, and might have seen more within the time, but it was necessary to avoid fatigue. The descriptions contained in the following pages are therefore to be regarded not as finished pictures, but rather as the scenes of a moving panorama, exhibiting in succession views of the more salient points in the various places to which the reader will be taken, and depicted according to the fashion of such scenes, too roughly to bear close inspection or minute criticism. When people were compelled to travel slowly, they could take with them, and had time to read and digest, full narratives of all they were about to see. It was by no means impossible to carry in the lumbering carriage, or to read during the leisurely journey, a whole library of such voluminous and now forgotten books as The Modern Traveler. But the rapidity of railway traveling has changed even the character of the guidebook, which, with more copious and complete information, has been so clipped and condensed, been made so concisely and methodically useful, such a veritable multum in parvo, that every other virtue is forgotten. And to take up a volume of Baedeker in order to beguile an hour, or even to obtain a general notion of a place, would be one of those freaks of which wise men are not readily guilty. People are therefore more than ever thrown upon reading of a different description, and notwithstanding the various books which have been published upon the Riviera, and the still larger list of those upon Italy, I think none of them, so far as I have seen, are exactly on the same lines as the present. It is indeed not a little noticeable that so many in writing upon Italy should have chosen to wrap their description in some strange, weird story. In Corinne ou l'Italie, Madame de Staël depicts an exotic Scotch nobleman wildly drawn about from one part of Italy to another by a most extraordinary platonic love for an Italian improvisatrice, in order that the different localities may obtain description. The improvisatore of Hans Christian Andersen, with a difference of mode, is much upon the same model for the same purpose, the machinery by which the hero is blown hither and thither being much more prominent than the places upon which he alights. The transformation of Hawthorne, in order to describe Rome, forces us into strange scenes and into company with a mysterious faun and a beautiful murderess, while Romola by George Eliot, in describing Florence, drags us after a smooth-faced, smooth-tongued, heartless villain, who attains to power with an odd facility, and after blasting a lovely life, is to every reader's relief tragically removed from the world. Even Ruffini's Dr. Antonio, commencing amidst placid scenes with all the softness of a pastoral, terminates by breaking hearts, and in the din of a revolution, with guns crashing and roll of death-dealing musketry on the streets of Naples. Amongst its many deficiencies, the present volume is undoubtedly wanting in this sensational element of popularity. Neither, on the other hand, can it lay claim to the merit of filling the place either of the guidebook or of the medical advisor. Its chief utility may be in giving, in a general way, to those designing to go abroad for a period of time, some knowledge which may perhaps aid them where to go and what to see. while there is furnished for the benefit of novices in the preliminary chapters some practical information which the experienced traveler, who knows it all and could state it much better, will be graciously pleased, if so inclined, to skip. In revising at home what was written abroad, I have studied to ensure accuracy of statement, and have been rather surprised on comparing authorities to find how widely they frequently differ regarding matters involving figures, so much so that occasionally I have withheld any statement on the subject. Some of these discrepancies I have noticed. Accurate ideas of places can be best formed with the aid of the pictorial art. A book of this nature is susceptible of endless illustration, and but for adding to the bulk and the expense, there could have been no difficulty in illustrating every page of the travels. I have preferred selecting a few subjects, nearly all from my own sketches, which have been lithographed by Waterston of Edinburgh. That of the Estrelles is from a sketch in colors by a lady friend. Of these illustrations, Mentone has carried off the lion's share, and perhaps rightly. Because of all the places of health resort visited by us, we conceived it to be the most charming, and it was in the winter-time our headquarters. There are those who prefer Cannes, Hyères, Bordighera, or San Remo. Even Alassio may become a favorite residence, but it was our opinion that Mentone unites to a well-sheltered, dry, sunny winter climate, which is, however, not suitable for all invalids. The most beautiful and picturesque scenery, the most delightful walks and excursions, with a fascinating rurality which, I fear, the natives, looking at the matter from a French point of view, are bent on destroying, by way of raising it up as a sort of rival in gaiety to such places as Nice. There is one drawback in its proximity to the Monte Carlo gambling tables, but to those who can resist temptation, a trip to Monte Carlo, a bright, beautiful, sunny spot, clean and tidy, with its tropical gardens, its broad terraces flanked by elegant white stone balustrades, is only an additional attraction, while the adjoining unique peninsula of Monaco, running out into the sea from the mountains of the Tête de Chine and crowned by its palace, its fortifications, its dwellings, its trees, is one of the many attractive points which, combined with the beautiful blue of the Mediterranean, lends such a charm to this part of the Riviera. This book would probably never have been written had it not been begun and all but completed abroad, while in the sunshine of gladness and hope. Looking to the cause of our travels, it was unavoidable that I should mention at its close how sadly all hopes were crushed. But I have striven as far as possible to eschew the introduction of all merely personal allusions. I feel, however, I must take this opportunity of thanking the members of the legal body to which I belong, and of which I had, at the time it became advisable to leave home, the honor of being chief office-bearer, for their courtesy to me then, and for the heartfelt sympathy which so many of them have since expressed. I would only say to them as to others, that we have had of late not a few examples of valued friends who long after it became really necessary have toiled and wearied their brains out in the pursuit of an anxious and laborious profession, till they have spent their last days or years in utter prostration, better far when they can, to obtain thorough relaxation in the enjoyment of a year or even 2 years of continental travel over such interesting ground as in this book I have attempted in some small measure to describe. William Miller, George Square, Edinburgh, July 1879. Wintering in the Riviera, Chapter 1. Continental Traveling. I have sometimes thought that if it were possible for a person of mature years now living to return to the world with memory unimpaired after a period of 500 or even of 100 years hence, how strangely new to him everything would appear. Events succeed each other in these times with such startling rapidity that he would be a bold man who would venture to predict what even a generation will bring forth. We may speculate on the effects likely to result from agencies now in operation as to what, for example, may be the future of Great Britain, looking to the gigantic scale on which hazardous enterprise is carried on, to the contests of labor with capital in which natural laws are set at defiance, to the growth of ritualism in the English Church, to the penchant which our rulers seem to have for annexing or conquering remote provinces, stern and wild or insalubrious, to 1,000 other things which are with more or less force influencing or disquieting our country, commercially, socially, or politically. But none of us can possibly foresee the actual consequences and the condition of things to which they will lead. In the future, there is so much dependent on occurrences which appear to us to be fortuitous, though truly under the guidance of supreme wisdom, that we can only feel that over all there hangs an impenetrable veil of mysterious darkness. A single unexpected event may turn aside the policy of an age, or even alter the divisions of the world. A single man by a foolish blunder may plunge nations into protracted war. A single happy discovery, a single clever invention, may affect the fortunes or alter the habits of a whole people. A single convulsion of nature may change the aspect of a state. But when we turn from the future to the past, the case is different. And we can pretty well realize what the feelings of one who has lived, say, 60 years ago, would be if he could now return to earth. It would indeed be some time ere he would begin to grasp the extent of the wonderful changes which, since he formerly lived, have been effected. But of all the changes flowing from the inventions and discoveries which the long peace succeeding Waterloo was instrumental in producing, he would probably be most struck by the revolution accomplished in the matter of traveling. We have only to go back half a century to the time when a tour upon the continent of Europe was attended by great expense, inconvenience, and even danger. It consumed much time, and no Englishman upon whom business did not lay a necessity to travel could undertake any very extensive pilgrimage in these foreign countries, unless possessed of ample means united to ample leisure. It was thus generally reserved for young noblemen and gentlemen of wealth, as the completion of their education, to take with a tutor, a courier, and a sufficient retinue the grand tour of Europe, the limit of which was usually, though not always, Constantinople. I suppose this circumstance has given rise to the continental idea, which at least formerly prevailed, that every Englishman was a milord anglais, and to its practical consequence, from which present travelers continue to suffer, the custom, gradually disappearing, of charging English persons upon a different scale from that applied to natives. No doubt many of those men of former days scattered money profusely, and to a certain extent their successors continue to do so, and are even exceeded by some of the American travelers, who, accustomed to pay in dollars where shillings with us often suffice, contrive by their extravagance to spoil for others the places they frequent. Times are now changed since the days of our grandfathers. The treacherous sailing vessel, the smack, which would take at one time 3 days, and at another, because of adverse winds, 3 weeks to go from Leith to London, is supplanted by the steady, expeditious, and almost faultlessly punctual steamboat, while the lumbering diligence, or almost equally lumbering post-chaise, has been driven out of the field by wherever it exists the rapid railway train. Nevertheless, as regards continental railway rapidity, Monsieur Arago's expectations that Parisians might on the same day examine the preparations of our squadron at Toulon, may breakfast on juicy rouget at Marseille, may bathe at midday their relaxed limbs in the mineral waters of Bagnères, and return in the evening by way of Bordeaux to attend a ball or the opera house, have hardly as yet at least been realized. For the railway train abroad bears about the same proportion in point of speed to the English train as the clumsy diligence did of old to our high flyers and our 10-mile-an-hour stagecoaches. Sometimes, indeed, people in former times who were able to do so traveled on the continent in pursuit of health, and a very interesting account of a tour of this description, made to a large extent over the same ground as that which forms the subject of description in the following pages, is contained in The Diary of an Invalid by Henry Matthew A.M., made during a journey performed in the years 1817, 18, and 19, through Italy, Switzerland, and France, from which an idea of the difference of traveling in those days, 60 years ago, from what it is now, may to some extent be gathered. Since the introduction of railways, which now form a complete network all over the continent of Europe, reaching some of its wildest parts, and not hesitating even to penetrate some of its loftiest mountains, and often by means of costly tunnels connecting long stretches of country, traveling has been made so easy, and the facilities for availing themselves of the means of locomotion have been rendered so great, that there are comparatively few persons of the better classes who have not at some time or other, and in a greater or lesser measure, visited continental lands. Our very mechanics have, especially by means of excursion trains, sometimes in connection with such great occasions as foreign exhibitions, been enabled to see a little of other lands. And even the seeing a little of another land is calculated to remove prejudices, to enlarge the ideas, and to extend the amount of one's information. People in the present day travel sometimes for pleasure, and to obtain acquaintance with what cannot be seen at home, and sometimes for the sake of health. And it is astonishing to what an extent this latter reason has operated on the people of Great Britain, who rush from the rigors of their northern climate, its clouds, its fogs, and its rains, to enjoy the sunshine of warmer places, avoiding and exchanging wet, foggy, and chilly winter quarters at home for pleasant, sunny places abroad. So much is this the case that whole colonies of English people, many of them owning houses built or bought for their residence, are found scattered over the continent, particularly on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. They go to winter there, and the places they frequent become remarkably English in their habits and in their language. The force of the English character, and still more of the English money, bearing down and upon the native population. Indeed, it may rather be said that towns have been built by or for the occupation of the English, as, for example, Cannes, which, if it do not altogether owe its existence, is acknowledged by the natives to owe its new creation, its growth and extent, to Lord Brougham. We had on various previous occasions taken a summer's run abroad. The protracted visit we paid to the continent, which forms the subject of this volume, was dictated by considerations of health, but we combined with it, and advantageously, even for that end, some tours of pleasure. The countries visited by us on this occasion were France, Italy, and Switzerland, and it is with special reference to them that the remarks offered in this and the succeeding introductory chapters apply. I propose in this chapter to deal shortly with some of the bugbears which frighten many from crossing the Channel, to state some of the peculiarities of foreign travel, and to note a few other matters with which those new to the subject may find it useful to be acquainted previous to setting out. The first great stumbling block in the way of going abroad is to many, especially elderly persons, the want of knowledge of the language of the country to which they wish to direct their steps, or the want of power to converse in it freely. There can be no doubt that it is of great consequence to have an acquaintance with the language of the country in which one desires to travel or reside for a time. People are saved much inconvenience and often money when they can talk it with fluency and can comprehend what the natives say, usually the more difficult operation. At the same time, in all frequented parts of France, Italy, and Switzerland, either English or French will carry anyone through. French is spoken by nearly every educated person who travels on the continent, with perhaps the exception of the Germans, who, though they may know a little French, seem to give a preference to the acquisition of the English language, in which frequently they converse with great purity and ease. At the hotels, the landlord or one of the waiters, sometimes all of them, can speak English more or less perfectly. Nay, what is very surprising is that the man sometimes called portier, who sits in a little chamber at the door, has often a better acquaintance with English than even landlord or waiter. This porter, or, as he is more correctly designated, concierge, is attached to all large hotels, and his ostensible duty is not that of carrying luggage, for which business there are men of a different stamp under him, but consists in keeping the keys of the rooms, attending to letters, and answering inquiries. In reality, he is a man of superior intelligence, and acts often as the interpreter of the house, for he is generally acquainted with many languages, and usually with at least French, English, and German, and has to reply to questions in these different languages almost in the same breath. In frontier places, his acquaintance is extended to the language of the neighboring country. It may be, for instance, Italian or Spanish. However, among employees and others with whom the traveler has to do, the knowledge of many languages is not confined to the gens portier. At Mentone, I was informed that a hairdresser could speak 5 languages. And how else could he hope from a hairdresser's point of view to please his patients? At Rome, having gone to the wrong shop, I had to experience the difficulties of undergoing an operation by a gentleman of the fraternity who could speak nothing but Italian, and we should never have succeeded in coming to a mutual understanding but for the kindly intervention of a priest who was being shaved and could speak French. And after all, it did not wholly save me from that croppiness in which the foreign coiffeur delights. This linguistic faculty does not stop at hairdressers, who may be considered to be men of an advanced race. At Mentone we used to employ a donkey girl, who could also speak a little in 5 languages. Philippina was a bright, intelligent girl, much liked by her employers, and no doubt she found her advantage in knowing something of their different tongues. In Switzerland, for the most part, the German language prevails, and it is occasionally uncommonly hard, if one is not acquainted with German, or has but a smattering of it, to get on, say, with a coachman who knows nothing else. At Ragaz, where they speak German, I put a question to a stall-keeper selling goods on the street, and was promptly answered by a young girl of the adjoining stall in English. I asked her how she came to know English. She learnt it at school. Were they all taught English, I asked. Oh no, those who desired to be taught had to pay for it. The shopkeepers abroad, however, have in many cases acquaintance with English sufficient to enable them to effect sale of their wares. They quickly discover us to be English, and when they speak our language they like to air it and answer questions put in the shopkeeper's language, made, we imagine, with all correctness of expression and of accent, in our own. In Rome we found that all the cab drivers could speak French, which of course facilitates going about to those who cannot speak much Italian. In Italy generally, unless it might be in speaking to women servants, and not even always in their case, we did not find much necessity for using Italian. Either French or English was in most places understood. Sometimes we have even had English landladies, as at the Grand Hotel in Siena, and at the Tramontano at Sorrento. But this is a species of good fortune, telling on the English traveler's comfort in many ways, which is seldom to be enjoyed. It only suggests that other English women might find Italy a good field for similar enterprise. In former days, the passport system was a difficulty which afflicted the minds of timorous travelers. Apart from the surveillance implied, there was the trouble and expense of procuring it, and having the proper visas affixed by the representatives of continental governments. The anxiety lest in passing some corner of a foreign territory, some debatable land, it might not be en règle. The detentions it occasioned, and the perturbation of spirit which arose, should it by any accident have been mislaid or lost, there being no absolute certainty that if imprisoned in a cold, damp, dreary dungeon, for want of the necessary safe conduct, our government, after a suitable period of fruitless negotiation, would go to war with the foreign power for the defaulter's release. On one occasion in 1855, On entering Geneva by diligence, I missed my passport, which on arrival I found lying at my feet, and did not know what would happen. But the man in collecting passports from the passengers fortunately overlooked me. This was a species of the rarest good luck, upon which, of course, it was utterly impossible to reckon. And the passport system was one which was felt by people living in a land in which everyone is free, without inquiry of any kind, to travel where and when he pleases, to be an intolerable annoyance. It is still maintained, but with a view, I presume, not to discourage English traveling, a source of immense profit to the natives. A British subject has only on passing a frontier to declare his nationality, and he is at once passed through, except at some places where he is asked for his carte de visite, and if he have not one at hand, even this is not insisted on. If it be apparent that he is what he represents himself to be, an Anglais, or, what is the same thing to them, an American. Yet a passport is sometimes useful. It now costs little and should always be taken. It is easily got under the directions contained in Bradshaw's Continental Guide, and the visas of the foreign consuls seem now to be unnecessary, at least for the countries in which we were to travel. It is particularly important in some towns to facilitate the obtaining of registered letters, even ordinary letters occasionally, as I have found in 1872 at Brussels on a former trip, having unfortunately lost my passport at Strasbourg, will scarcely be delivered at the poste restante without production of the passport or other presumable evidence of identity. And it is said in guidebooks, although we have never experienced the benefit of the information, that it operates as an admission to certain places of public resort. Although to the mens conscia recti it may matter little, it does not follow that with all this relaxation of former rigor, people are altogether free from surveillance. The spy may not crop up here and there, as according to Doyle he did, to afflict Messrs. Brown, Jones, and Robinson. Yet travelers do meet with evidence of the existence of a secret and prying police. At Aix-les-Bains, which however may be regarded as a frontier town, we found the register of visitors kept in a book furnished by the police, and containing instructions for the entry of all names and particulars. And almost everywhere, immediately upon arrival at a hotel, a waiter comes to take down the name, address, profession, etc., which apart from police regulations is only proper. Besides a passport, there are other things to be attended to in order that the way may be made smooth. People do not always, when they resolve to travel, sit upon their boxes. I mean, of course, metaphorically. Yet in traveling abroad, at least for a period of any duration, some thought must be bestowed upon the impedimenta, and it is very proper to take such boxes as will stand the immense fatigue to which all luggage is exposed, and to which the foreign system of registration greatly adds. Very little regard is paid by porters to the conservation of the luggage. It is tossed and dragged along over iron-bound tables, and huge, heavy iron-bound and iron-cornered American chests with their piercing little iron casters are often thrown or deposited remorselessly on the top of smaller and weaker packages. Very small articles, indeed, should never be put in the vans. It is better, and in the long run cheaper, to have fewer packages and of a larger size. At the same time, they are very inconvenient if unwieldily large, as too often one sees them to be, requiring 2 men for their carriage and needing to be left outside the bedroom, an inconvenience both to the traveler herself and her fellow travelers, for it is the ladies who are in this respect the great transgressors. Some ladies seem to travel with their whole wardrobe, or at all events with a useless number of changes of raiment. On one occasion we met a gentleman and lady who had with them 9 huge boxes, nearly filling up the top of a large omnibus, besides smaller articles, including their maid's modest provision. This is a grievous mistake. Ladies ought to travel with the least possible quantity of changes. More than is fairly needful is inconvenient in many ways. Apart from causing detentions to others, it is a source of anxiety and is most expensive in countries where the luggage is all weighed and every pound or extra pound must be paid for. Among the little things to be taken, no good traveler will, of course, omit a pocket corkscrew and a flask of cognac. Nor will he neglect soap. If he have not made it a rule in all traveling to use his own soap, he is charged at foreign hotels 1 franc for savon. I have heard a man growling over the imposition, but it served him right, while the article was just sold to him like anything else, with the usual 200 or 300% hotel profit added. We considered it advisable, especially in view of traveling in Italy, where the water is said to be often impure and consequently unsafe to drink, to take with us a small filter. But although we used our filter occasionally, I cannot say we were frequently conscious of drinking bad water. It is, however, a proper precaution, as water may be bad without betraying its quality by the taste. An Ashanti filter with a quart tin bottle, to be had from Atkins & Co., 62 Fleet Street, London, occupies little space and costs 8 shillings. Were Messrs. Atkins to devise a portable little filter for use at the table by insertion in a tumbler, so as to purify the drinking water without the fuss of a large filter, which it is inconvenient to carry, and which one cannot bring to the public room, it would be of much use. It must be borne in mind, however, that filters do not destroy organic matter suspended in the water, and for this purpose permanganate of potash may be employed. A drop or 2 of a solution of this substance, which may be purchased in dry grains at any chemist's, easily dissolved when wanted, effects destruction of organic matter, but gives so unpleasant a bitterness to the flavor of the water that we scarcely ever used it. There are, however, things more important to provide, and among them are good guidebooks. The rapid growth and extraordinary ramifications of the railway system have created a new branch of literature in the railway timetables. It is curious to take up an early copy of Bradshaw, consisting only of a few pages, small pocket size, neatly got up, and to contrast it with English Bradshaw of the present time. If such a book be needful in Great Britain, people are even more helpless without it abroad. Bradshaw's Continental Guide, Special Edition, will always be found to be most useful, both as a preparatory and as an accompanying handbook. It contains a great deal of information, which, however, ought to be taken in a general way, or as the lawyers say, cum nota. Perfect reliance cannot always be placed upon the accuracy of its railway and other timetables and its tariffs. On arriving in a country, it is especially necessary to secure, in addition, one of its latest official railway guides. In France, there is published once a week on the Sundays l'Indicateur des chemins de fer et de la navigation service officiel. This costs 60 centimes, about sixpence, and is a long folio of inconvenient size. As nearly all French travelers purchase a copy when they start on a journey, it doubtless obtains a large sale. The Livre Chaix Spécial pour France, there is another edition for Europe generally, is an official guide of a more convenient size. It is published once a month, book shape duodecimo, costs 1 franc, and has no advertisements, which are scattered through the indicateur in a tormenting way, though sometimes useful when desired information is thereby discovered, which it might more readily be if, as in Bradshaw, all the advertisements were thrown systematically to the end of the book. It is, however, troublesome to follow these French guides when divergence from the main lines is desired to be made. The lines are cut up into fragments without the references contained in Bradshaw to other pages where the connecting railways occur, and the neat little well-engraved maps in the Livre Chaix do not bear, as in Bradshaw's map, the page references where the tables of the railways are to be found. Bradshaw is puzzling enough, but sometimes it is felt that the Livre Chaix is one of those mysteriously arranged productions which no fella can understand. In Italy, there is published once a month, costing 1 franc or lira, l'Indicatore Ufficiale. This is peculiarly arranged and requires study, but the Italian lines are so few compared with those of France that there is no insuperable difficulty in discovering the time bills of particular railways. The Italian Indicatore contains various preliminary directions which it is well to read. They are curious and embrace, inter alia, regulations relative to the transport of cats and monkeys. The Italians have also a long Indicatore, similar to the French weekly one, and in both countries, smaller and cheaper district guides with more limited information are to be had. In Switzerland, a Guide des Voyageurs en Suisse is published apparently twice a year. At least those procured in the Swiss traveling season are marked Saison d'été 1877 or 1878, as the case may be. It is never safe to trust to a guide of a past month, although changes are generally only made in the beginning of the winter season, or about 15th or 16th of October, and in the beginning of the summer or spring season. By not observing a change of this kind which had just been made, we were detained at Toulon for 3 or 4 hours, waiting for the next train to Hyères. Although it is not desirable to burden oneself with many books in traveling, Baedeker's guidebooks, which on the whole are very accurate and useful, ought not to be dispensed with. Italy is embraced in 3 little volumes, Northern, Central, and Southern, and Baedeker has separate guides to Switzerland, France, and other countries, so that if one has to travel much, quite a little library requires to be taken. Baedeker's Northern Italy, however, embraces the Riviera de Ponente, in which Cannes and Mentone are, and the journey thither from Paris and towns on the way, such as Lyon, Avignon, Nîmes, and Marseille, while southward it extends as far as Florence. Murray's guidebooks are very useful, and are much more full and detailed, but consequently are more bulky, and are therefore more suitable for protracted visits to a town such as Venice. Neither Baedeker nor Murray, however, are to be wholly relied upon, especially for the latest information. For example, we found in Italy that while it is said in Baedeker there are no fees to pay, in the different Académies delle Belles Arts there is now charged 1 franc per person for admission. I would add also that Baedeker's estimates of hotel charges can by no means be relied on as exact, although they may at one time have been so, or they may in some cases be those with which Germans are charged, Baedeker being a publication originating in Germany. These books all require from time to time careful revision, and considering the importance to the traveler of having the latest information and the large sale they command, they ought to be revised at short intervals. There are certain very useful guidebooks published in France of 2 sorts, the Guide Diamant, which are little pocket volumes in small type, and the Guide Grand Format, which are of a larger size. Each class, published only in French, contains a series of volumes applicable to the different parts of France, as well as volumes devoted to other countries. The divisional volumes for France are exceedingly useful, as containing detailed information respecting the districts to which they apply. I may also mention that Mr. Cook, the tourist, publishes a series of handbooks for the countries to which his tours apply, and that recently Black has also added to his list of guidebooks guides to the south of France. To those visiting Rome, Hare's Walks in Rome, 2 volumes, will be found extremely serviceable. Unfortunately, we did not take it with us, adding to the quantity of books with which we had to travel. It is a little heavy to carry about in the hand, but it directs attention to what is best worth seeing, and may be consulted at one's lodgings before and after visiting the attractions of Rome. In the old coaching days, when the mail or the diligence drove through a town and generally stopped at one of the principal inns, there was not much deliberation needed, or even much choice granted as to where the passenger should sleep. But it is one of the inconveniences attendant upon the railway system, to a certain extent obviated by the erection of station hotels, that he has not an opportunity from ocular inspection beforehand, on arriving at a strange town, of forming an idea as to where he should go, and it is an observation on Bradshaw, more or less applicable to other guidebooks, that it does not do to rely implicitly on its recommendations of hotels, a circumstance which probably arises from the notice of given hotels having been written years previously, and means not having been used to obtain a complete revision from year to year. More reliance in this respect is to be placed on Baedeker's guidebooks. Hotels marked by Baedeker with a star will almost always be found of a good character. In the absence of other means of intelligence, we have sometimes been driven, like many others, to ask information from chance fellow travelers, at other times to get it at the hotel from which we started in the morning, not infrequently the less trustworthy method of the two. but as it is most desirable to have reliable information on this subject, it is, where practicable, by far the best plan before setting out upon a tour, to settle as nearly as possible the route to be taken, and to obtain a note from friends who have traveled along it of the hotels they would recommend. In possession of this knowledge beforehand, all anxiety is removed, and one is enabled to write previously, requesting the landlord to retain rooms. Letters and telegrams with such requests are always carefully attended to, the hotel keeper no doubt considering that application to him is made from choice and not from chance. And with that excellent advice, much of which still holds true, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Wintering in the Riviera, with notes of travel in Italy and France, and practical hints to travelers. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this useful work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.